To make the pâté sucre, I am going to add 55 grams of sugar to my 170 grams of plain flour. Just give that a bit of a stir, and then you are going to rub in 115 grams of butter. Okay, so I am just going to start that off with just using my knife, so I'm cutting it into the sides just to keep my ingredients as cool as possible to prevent my fat from melting, and so that the process of shortening can happen. So shortening is where we rub our fat into our starch grains, and then each of those starch grains is given a waterproof coating from the butter, and so therefore when we add our liquid, it absorbs less liquid, so therefore less gluten is formed, and it gives us a shorter strand structure. So it's important that we look at doing this. So once you've cut it in to smaller bits, you can then just pop in your hand and start rubbing it together. So you're rubbing it, you're not squashing it, so you're just rubbing it to coat each of those flour grains. Once you have got your mixture so that it looks like breadcrumbs and all of the big bits of fat have been rubbed in, you are going to crack your egg and just whisk it slightly, and then you're going to add your egg to your mixture and then bring that together to bind it together. Okay, so rather than using water in the pâté sucre, we are using egg, which does make it a little bit harder to handle, but it enriches it, so it adds some protein to it as well, so it does add a nutritional element to it. If you're finding it a bit hard to get it to come together, you might need a couple of teaspoons of cold water to bring your pastry together. But you can see it's coming together in big clumps, so that should come together quite well. So it will feel quite sticky. If it's too sticky, you might just need to add a small amount of flour to your mixture, but on the whole it is generally quite a sticky dough, so you're just kind of kneading it just a little bit just to bring it all together. When you're ready to roll out your pastry, what I find is if you put a big sheet of cling film down and then put your pastry over one half of it, and then just cover it over with your cling film. Because we found out that it is quite a sticky pastry, it just makes it a bit easier to roll out, because otherwise you'd be using quite a lot of flour because it would be sticking to your rolling pin. Okay, so you don't need to do the one roll turn as you would normally do, but I would recommend rolling it out probably to about the thickness of a pound coin, and then you're just going to put it in the fridge to chill and relax a bit before you are going to line your tin. So just try and make it even, because that's when you put it in the fridge, and if you leave it in there for longer, when the butter sets, it just makes it a bit more difficult to mould into place. So we're not going to put it into the fridge for too long, but it's just going to let it relax, because we've worked the gluten a bit by rubbing it in and bringing it together, so we just need to let it relax so that our pastry doesn't shrink away from the sides of our tin. I just removed the pastry from the fridge, and I've just peeled back the layer of cling film from the top. So for my tartlet tin, you've got to think about the fact that you need to cover the base, but it also needs to go up the side. So you're looking at kind of having a centimetre around it. So I've just put my tin on there just to give me a bit of a guide, and then just using a knife, you can just cut yourself a piece of pastry. Now, it hasn't been chilling for too long, so it may well still be a little bit sticky, but it should be a bit more malleable than if it's in the fridge for too long. Okay, now if you do struggle and it ends up breaking up, you can just fill it and patch it up, because it will stick together and you will form that base. okay? So just lift up the edge of your pastry and then down into the corner so you can see how it's going to create a bowl as opposed to a dish, okay? So it's going to have these edges here, which will give it that nice finish to it, okay? If you've got a sharp dish like this, you can always roll over your rolling pin off the top, or you can just get your knife and trim it on an angle. Now you can see that I've got a little bit of spare bit there, so I am just gonna top that up. So any holes you can just kind of fill, and we don't want it to shrink down too much, so I'm just gonna bring up my edges of my pastry. So we've then got a nice finish to my dish. I'm just going to put in a couple of fork marks on the bottom, and then for a dish like this, a fan tin, I'm going to use some greaseproof paper and some lentils to line my tin. So you're just going to get yourself a piece of greaseproof paper, scrunch it up, put it in your pastry case, and then fill it with some lentils or rice or baking beans, and that's just going to hold the bottom down, so it's going to prevent it from lifting up. It's going to keep it so that it's nice and weighed down, because we're baking it without anything in it, and that's what blind baking is. So we're going to cook our pastry case so that it's ready and done. These are then going to go into a preheated oven on gas 5 or 190 degrees C for about 10 to 15 minutes until they are light and golden brown and your pastry is cooked all of the way through. To make the creme pat, you're going to start by adding 150 millilitres of milk and 150 millilitres of double cream to your pan, and you are then just going to heat that gently. The next part that you're going to do is you are going to separate your egg. So I'm wanting my yolk in the larger bowl and my white in the smaller bowl. So I'm going to just crack it over the bowl that I want the white in. If you are wanting to use your whites for meringue or something like that, you do need to make sure that your bowl is clean and grease free and that you don't get any yolk into it. So all I'm doing is just putting it through my fingers to get the white off, and then put the yolk into. To my egg yolks, I've added a tablespoon of corn flour, which is going to thicken your creme pat, so your creme patissier, half a teaspoon of vanilla, and 40 grams of caster sugar. Whilst you are doing this, you do need to make sure that you are keeping a check on your milk and cream mixture, because you just want it warmed through. You don't want to bring it to the boil, because otherwise that will scorch it and it'll affect the flavour. So you are just going to get your whisk and you're just going to whisk this together until it goes pale and fluffy. Be careful not to throw it all out of the bowl. So you're just getting it so that it's combining together and we're getting that sugar so that it's starting to dissolve. What we're then going to do is we're going to whisk our milk and cream mixture into it, which is why it needs to be warm and not hot, because otherwise you will scramble your eggs. So you can see that the colour and the texture of that has changed, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a bit of damp kitchen roll underneath my bowl and drizzling it in a small amount of the time, small amount at a time whilst you're whisking it. And then that just returns back to your pan, and we're then going to put it over the heat whilst whisking to thicken it up. Once you put it in the pan, you need to put it onto a medium heat, and you're going to continue to whisk it. And it might take up to about 8 to 10 minutes, but you're whisking it, you're heating it gently. You don't want the eggs to scramble. You can see as you're whisking it that it goes from being a frothy bubble on the top to, as soon as you kind of see that first bubble from it boiling, you know that it has reached the temperature. You know that your corn flour will have gelatinized and that your egg yolk will have coagulated, and that will be what has set your custard. And so you can see that actually it's got that coating consistency. At that point, you're going to turn off the heat and you're going to transfer it out of your pan and into a bowl, so it can go back in the same bowl that you whisked it in before. And then that is going to cool and set. You need to make sure that it is taken out of the pan, because if it's left in the pan, it will continue to cook, and that's where you will end up with scrambled egg. You might need to whisk it occasionally in between, just to make sure that you're getting a nice smooth custard. And then what you're going to do is, if you think about when you heat milk, it creates a skin, so you get a skin on the top of your custard. What I'm going to do is I am putting on some cling film, and it's touching the top of my custard, my creme pat, and as it cools, it's going to prevent it from forming a skin, because actually that cling film is going to form a skin. So you now need to put that in a cool place to just cool down and thicken. So once you've arranged all of your fruit onto your custard, onto your tart cases, prepare some arrowroot. So you can just get some ground arrowroot and prepare it according to the instructions on the back. I've just used some of the peach juice to actually make it, and then you are just going to carefully pop some over and try and pull it so that it's then actually giving a glaze to your finished tarts to make it look a bit more finished and professional. So once you've finished glaze, you are ready to serve, and if you're not serving straight away, you will need to store them in the fridge because of the creme pat.